Hello, everybody. Welcome to WOTS Weekly Features. Today's guest is Ed OLoughlin, journalist and author of many, many works, including his new tech thriller, This Eden. We'll be talking about writing spy fiction, his new book, and more. I'm Yali, and I'll be your host. WOTS Toronto operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Paytune First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabe and Allied Nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land you live on, wherever you're tuning in from. Ed OLoughlin is an Irish-Canadian author and journalist. He is the author of 3 novels, including the Scotiabank Giller Prize finalist, Minds of Winter, the critically acclaimed Top Loader, and the Booker Prize longlisted Not Untrue and Not Unkind. As a journalist, Ed has reported from Africa for several papers, including the Irish Times. He was the Middle East correspondent for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age of Melbourne. Ed was born in Toronto and raised in Ireland, and he now lives in Dublin with his wife and 2 children. Welcome, Ed. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's dive right into it. Could you tell us a little bit about This Eden and I guess kind of the inspiration behind it as well?
Well, it's, as you say, the form is, it's a tech thriller. The inspiration was really just reading the newspapers and watching TV and the internet like everybody else. And I became, like a lot of people, very concerned about the big picture of where the world is going, and things like climate change, things like inequality, social unrest and breakdown, the growth of fake news. And it occurred to me that one thing that holds them all together, it's not an original idea, is that there's a problem with money, that money is basically seems to be the dominant species on the planet right now. And how did that happen? So, that was the big idea, which is a political idea, but I wanted to try and explore that through, a form that would be not only informative, but also entertaining. So I decided that write it as a thriller, which is not something I've done before. My other books have been, other genres or no genre at all. But this one ended up being a thriller with lots of reveals and chases and unexpected twists of plot.
Yes, it was very fun and also very timely, especially, recently billionaires have gone to space and all of this kind of absurd things have happened. So it was definitely very, very timely, I thought. I have to admit, it was the first of this genre that I've personally read as well. So it was very fun to dive into for me. What drew you to writing in this genre specifically? Like, did you find that it offers up anything that other genres don't necessarily?
Well, I don't want to go into spoilers, but there's a couple of ideas in it that were quite big, and I thought that they would lend themselves to the big reveal treatment, which doesn't really work well in a book of essays or the more contemplative type of narrative. So I figured from the start that I would use the thriller format to do that, and from there you look at there's only a kind of limited template for thrillers. You have to have mortal peril for some of the characters. You have to have something they want very strongly and something they're running away from usually. And there's a kind of small cast of stock characters. You can have detectives, or you can have spies, or you can have soldiers, or people like that, as well as ingenues and people caught up in the middle. So I went kind of by default almost with the spy thriller overall concept, because these people are going to cover a lot of ground, and detectives tend to be very local, and so soldiers are a bit limited. Whereas spies can do anything, or at least they can in fiction, if not in real life.
Absolutely. Were there any other thrillers that you read or researched while you were getting ready to write this book?
Not specifically, no. I mean, when I was younger, I read a lot of thrillers or thriller adjacent fiction. People like Graham Greene and John le Carre. Frederick Forsyth, and that stayed with me. So that was kind of in my rucksack for when I needed it. I just mind my own past reading.
Was there, like, what was the research process behind all of the knowledge of tech and economy and money behind the book? I found that the descriptions of all of that were very accessible as somebody who doesn't know what a stock is. So what was that like for you?
Well, the stuff about the financial markets, basically I just stole from Michael Lewis, from his excellent books about finance and the world of finance, which are very accessible, very fun, but also often quite chilling. And one in particular was Flash Boys, which is about how people in and around New York in particular sought to make vast sums of money by just shaving millionths of a second off the time it took to make a computer trade. So that's kind of at the heart of this. I had a whole lot more about that in the original draft, and then I took it out because even I didn't understand it. I pared it all down, really. I mean, I'm not a finance person, and I'm certainly not a tech person, but I wanted to write about finance and technology, so I ended up being very, very sparing with that. And also, my publisher said, whatever you do, don't write a book that people have to have any tech or financial knowledge to understand. So I'm hoping I achieved that.
For sure. I think you did. I don't have any knowledge, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Could you, so something that comes up in the book is the idea of the simulation, quote unquote. And without getting into spoilers too much, could you tell us about that idea to include that thought in it? I was really intrigued by that. It was a little bit new to me.
Yeah. But I mean, the simulation hypothesis it's a real philosophical idea, or at least a thought experiment. And the most kind of popular, best known exemplar in popular culture would be The Matrix, movies, which most people have seen by now, and which posit that we're could all be living in a giant computer simulation that's controlling us for reasons beyond our ken. I don't go that far down that route, but one of the things that we're seeing in the world now is the way reality is being bent around us. That there are people who still don't believe COVID exists, and people who refuse to wear masks, and people who believe that it's more important that they be allowed to own an assault rifle than that children be safe at school. And with recent politicians who I'm not going to name, it does feel sometimes like reality is being melted away, and money is playing a big part in that. And so as my narrative goes on, the question of the nature of reality itself does become an issue for at least some of the characters, that they begin to wonder if it may not even be possible that they are living in the simulation. It's one of the many ideas that are examined, one of the questions that are asked, although I don't necessarily answer them.
Sure, absolutely. Could you talk a little bit about your characters? Now that you've mentioned them a little bit, what was the process like of developing all the characters and creating this conflict around them?
Well, because it's a thriller, it's not a character study, but I did want to have meaningful characters, and characters who seem to have flaws and strengths and desires. But I really started off with just kind of looking at the bare outlines of the chase narrative, and I wanted to start it in Vancouver because at the time I started preparing the book, there'd been a piece in The Economist about how Vancouver, which was famously at one point regarded as Canada's most livable city and one of the best cities in the world to live in, had become unlivable because property values had been driven so high by foreign real estate funds and by inward investment. And by the time I finished the book, that was also true of Toronto and Dublin and pretty much every other first world capital or major city. So, in the end, it didn't have to be Vancouver, but it starts in Vancouver. So I needed a couple of Canadian characters to start off with there. And boy and a girl, young people, because, one of the questions we have to ask when we look at what we're doing to the planet as a species is, do we deserve to survive? So I wanted to have, a number of characters whose worth seemed to be, worth saving. And I think young people, and relationships with young people in love is something most people can get behind. I couldn't write a book about puppies. So anyway, these two people are tech people. One of them is a tech whiz. One of them is her boyfriend, Michael, who's the son of Iranian immigrants. he is not a tech whiz. He's not the brightest guy, but he's a good guy in the end. And he finds himself a classic thriller. He's out of his depth, where he gets thrown into this international mystery of which he has no knowledge and which he's not remotely equipped to deal with, but somehow he gets pulled in on one side. And he's one of the kind of four main characters. There's a character called Taus, who's this kind of super spy, super tech, enigmatic, Mephistophelian character who seems to be pulling the strings, but maybe having his own strings pulled too. And then I knew it was going to end up in Dublin, because I thought, for convenience sake, I was out running one day and I thought, where do I end it? I thought, here's as good a place as any. So the other main character is Aoife, who is a fairly ordinary middle-class Irish university graduate who discovers by accident as a young woman that she has amazing powers of sneakiness and deceit, although she's quite a nice person really. And she ends up joining the police in Northern Ireland just for an adventure rather than go into law, and sucked into British intelligence, becomes disillusioned, and also gets sucked into this this quest. She knows a little bit more about what she's doing than Michael does, but not much. And then much of the book is the two of them sparking off each other and trying to figure out who is conning who.
Yes. Do you have a personal favorite character that you've written for the book?
I think Aoife is my favorite character, and she's most people's favorite character that I've spoken to. And she actually didn't begin as a major character at all. I just thought it would be handy if Taus, the kind of super spy mystery man, had a sidekick. And so she began just as a kind of a psychic, a bit like a witch's familiar. And she very quickly started acquiring backstory and interesting habits and powers. And she basically, for me, kind of took over. But she was a surprise discovery, and I think I like her all the better for that.
That's so delightful. It's so funny how characters sometimes speak to you in that way.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So you make an interesting choice with the dialogue in this book that I picked up on, which is that you wrote it without any quotation marks. And I just thought that was so curious. Could you talk about that decision?
That was kind of, that was actually quite a private in-joke, really. I'd noticed that a lot of literary books, or supposed literary books, now have stopped emitting quotation marks, and there seems to be a school of thought, particularly in MFA courses, that if you use traditional hooks, as we call them in journalism, quotation marks, that you're somehow a old-fashioned fuddy-duddy. And I told my publisher, I thought, well, I'm a bit concerned that this book might be too much fun for the literary crowd. My previous books have generally been identified as literary, in other words, dull. And I thought that if I knocked out the quotation marks, it would be a signal to shallow people who think that they're literary that this was a work of literature and not just some facile thriller. So it was kind of almost a private joke, maybe a slightly bitter joke. It has been commented on. I don't know if I would do it again in a novel. It would depend. But it did have an interesting side effect, that it makes you write dialogue in a way that pops off more as dialogue as opposed to text, because you're having to show that it's a person's thought process rather than the writer talking to them. So it did kind of introduce a certain discipline into how I wrote dialogue that I might not have used before. But again, essentially it's a gimmick, and don't let anyone ever tell you different. The fancy syntax, fancy sprung dialogue. It's all a bit of a joke, really.
Sure, absolutely. Well, when I first realized that you were doing it, I just thought back to being an undergrad and all of those rules being drilled into you, and I was like, he's breaking the rules. What is he doing? But I agree, it definitely adds something special to the book. So you mentioned future writing. Do you have any plans for any future writing in the future that you can reveal?
Well, I have a memoir coming out in March, a short memoir that I wrote last year, very short, That's coming out. Anansi are also publishing that in Toronto, and River Run in London. So that's in the process of being finalized now. We've got the cover, and we're working on we're squabbling over the blurb. But yeah, it's a very quick turnover from the last one. I usually average 5 years or more between books, but this one was done very quickly, and will be out next year. So buy that one too. It's called The Last Good Funeral of the Year, so it's very cheerful.
Wow. How is that writing process different between going from a thriller to a memoir?
Totally different. I mean, it's about me and my life, and it was written, it's one chapter for every month for 8 months last year. So it was looking back at the past through the filter of the present. I hadn't really planned ever to write a memoir. I never thought I would, and I was quite surprised when I found myself doing it last year. It came out very quickly. In some ways, it was very easy to write. In other ways, it was very difficult. It was quite emotional, but really, I'm quite a slow writer, and it came out of the keyboard very fast.
Wow. Besides your upcoming memoir, are there any other stories or topics that you haven't explored yet in your writing that you would like to one day?
I mean, yes, is the short answer. Yeah. I tend not to write the same kind of book twice, which is maybe not the best idea for a novelist. It's good to kind of do one thing well and then refine it. But I get kind of bored. I always want to do something different. So I do have I have 2 books in mind, one of which I started planning, one of which I'm trying to write. One of them is a very straightforward literary novel about a bunch of people young people who go off for a weekend together 30 years ago, and nothing much happens, but in an interesting and kind of fun way. Nobody scores, but they all kind of like each other. And, the other one is a crime novel, which will be set here in Dublin, which will be about immigration and race and property. And I kind of planned to put that on the long finger, but it keeps on intruding on my thoughts when I'm running. So, which is when most of my ideas come to me. So I might move that one up the queue a bit.
Sure. You mentioned writing about Dublin and writing about place a lot. What is, I guess, the thought process or the research, pardon me, that goes behind writing all of these different places? Because you've traveled to, in this Eden, a lot of different places, and I thought that they were all very well described, and the setting was very prevalent in the book for me. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, with this Eden, I didn't want to do an awful lot of research, as little as possible. I mean, I cheated a lot. I used a lot of Wikipedia and a lot of DuckDuckGo rather than Google. And but for the exotic locations, I mean, I've worked in Africa and the Middle East, so I thought if I could string a few of those together, I can use the sense of place that I have without having to do any travel, which I wouldn't have the money for, or any great depth of research. The one place which I hadn't been, which I needed to go to, was Palo Alto in Silicon Valley, which is a key location. But I was lucky; I got a grant from the Irish Arts Council that paid for my flight there. And I have a friend there who was a very senior tech guy. I was at college with him, and he moved to the States and has worked in tech there for 25 years. And I went to stay with him. He put me up in Palo Alto, but he told me, when I arrived there, he said, "Look, if you really want to know what the high tech milieu is like, this is somebody who has been in the room with Zuckerberg and all these guys." He said, "You don't need to come here. Just watch Silicon Valley on HBO." That's
oh my gosh! Wow,
that nails it.
Have you found that being in these places as a journalist has informed the way that you write fiction?
Yeah, it has. I mean, particularly with this, it's a thriller. When you work as a foreign correspondent, particularly in places like Africa and the Middle East, there is a lot of thriller type material going on around you, and you do meet interesting people, spooks and special force soldiers and human rights investigators and people who get under the surface of things and see interesting things, and you see interesting things yourself, and you hear lots of mad stories that you can never print, like the fact that there's a illicit trade in camels between Somalia and Saudi Arabia. That's just kind of a nugget. Or there's a narcotic called cat, which is grown in the Kenyan highlands and flown every day in unmarked planes to Somalia and Yemen. those are just bits of information I picked up in my travels down the years that I was able to use to string together, bits of narrative and ways for people to travel without showing up on the international tech radar. So, really a lot of it's gossip, but it was fun to try and string it all together to make a story.
Sure, absolutely. It was very fun to read as well. So my final question is, do you have any advice for any writers that would like to embark on this journey of writing maybe their first novel?
Well, everyone's different and everyone wants to write different things. I mean, write something that you love. I mean, don't try and write a Sally Rooney novel, or a Norman Mailer novel. Try and write see what comes out of you. They're writing what they love. Even commercial writers, of romantic fiction, they're writing what they love. They wouldn't be able to do it well enough to become bestsellers, which is what they want, from their genre. Beyond that, it's just try and write for 2 or 3 hours a day for 5 days a week, and don't be dismayed if it's crap, because it will be crap. But you write something and then you make it better. That's the only advice I can give. 12 years into my own writing career, just try and be consistent and above all, be patient. I'm not a patient person naturally, but I learned that through writing. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen next month. It won't happen for a year, 2 years, 3 years. But just enjoy the journey, because that's probably the most important part. Unless you win the Nobel Prize for Literature or sell 2 million copies, the actual writing process, which I love, I enjoy it more than anything, any work I've ever done before, even though it pays the least of any job I've ever had. That's your reward. So be patient and enjoy it.
Sure, absolutely. It looks like we've got a question from the audience as well. Have you considered a sequel to Minds of Winter?
No, I haven't. I have thought of revisiting that general territory. I'm fascinated by the Klondike gold rush, and I'd like at some point to write something about that. And I read, in fact, I was reading Pierre Berton's book about the Klondike fever, which kind of got me interested in the whole Northwest Territories, Yukon Territories, and that was actually, and got me reading about it, and that was the original germ. I then read the Arctic Grail about the hunt for the Northwest Passage and all the shenanigans around that. That was the germ for writing Minds of Winter. So I might at some point go back and revisit the Yukon, because the Klondike gold rush is obviously, it's almost part of the foundational myth for Canada's Northwest, as part of the Dominion. But it was a global event. For 2 years, the whole planet went Klondike crazy. And there was even there was some guy in Dublin, where I'm sitting now, who at one point was offering to fly people from Dublin to the Klondike in a balloon.
Oh, wow.
He got money off people. Whether he was a con man or a lunatic, I don't know. I'm trying to find out more about him. But that was a level of insanity that, for a period of a year, 2 years, all these people, men and women from halfway, from all around the world, were desperately trying to get to this creek, in the corner of the Yukon Territory, from which all the gold would already have been extracted before they even got there, at least all the available reachable gold. So I just think it's a fascinating event in world history. And you can even see parallels today with Bitcoin and the tech bubble.
Yes.
And just the characters were fascinating, the real life characters, the history. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it'll be a sequel to Minds of Winter, but it could be, certainly be in the same territory.
Awesome. Is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't covered already?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, I think definitely people should go out and buy this Eden and Minds of Winter and my previous 2 books if they can find them in print, and read them back to back, and then buy them for all their friends for Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthdays and bar mitzvahs, and
Yes, absolutely.
That's the most important message. If you take one thing away from this interview, that's it.
For sure. I mean, that's the best way to support an author, right?
Yeah, or you could PayPal me money directly,
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us today, Ed. It's been a pleasure.
It has been. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, everybody, to find out more about Ed and keep up with his work, visit edolaghlin.com. And to purchase your copy of This Eden, go to houseofanansi.com. This has been today's WOTS Weekly Feature. Tune in next week for YA Literature Week with the Children's Book Bank, Lecterm, and Yeah, Right. For discounts and deals, check out toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca/weekly-features. And from all of us at WOTS, happy summer reading.